G'day everyone and welcome to my channel. If this is the first time that you've clicked on one of my videos, my name's Michael Taylor. In this video I'm going to give a review of the VF Engineering Supercharger kit for the BMW E46 325Ci with the M54B25 engine. Now I'm going to have a look at all aspects of this supercharger install, from the quality of the packaging, the quality of the individual components, and also how easy or otherwise the installation process was. If you've been looking at the VF Engineering Supercharger kit for your E46 BMW, this will be a really great video for you because I'm not going to hold back in terms of my opinions on this kit. So hang around to the end as I give my rating of this kit. Now this kit has travelled a long way. I ordered it from ECS Tuning in America and had it shipped to my home here just on the outskirts of Brisbane, Australia. It cost me about $4,500 US, which is about $6,000 Australian, which was the exchange rate at the time, plus shipping. And then when it got here, I had to pay, I think it was $800 or $900 for import duty as well. But VF Engineering claimed that it's going to add about 100 horsepower to a standard M54B25 engine, which is the 2.5 litre inline 6-cylinder engine from BMW. I'm yet to test them out on that. I haven't done my first startup yet. I've still got a few other things to go. Stay tuned guys, because first startup I'm hoping will be in the next month or so. I guess like most things nowadays, you don't get printed instructions with anything you buy, be it a phone, a watch or a supercharger kit. You've got to go to the website, and in this case the VF Engineering website, and download the installation instructions. Now the other issue I had was that nothing in the box was clearly labelled or labelled at all. There's a variety of different size bolts and washers and nuts and things like that which are not labelled. So when it came to the installation process, it was a matter of getting out a ruler to measure the length of bolts to make sure it was the right bolt to go with this bracket or that bracket. And it just adds to the installation process. Whereas a little bit of attention to detail in terms of a label would have saved a fair amount of time when it came to the installation process. Also, I found the installation instructions fairly vague. I could see that there was a really good attempt to make it as detailed as possible, but it was almost like the instructions were written for a qualified mechanic who may have done this installation once or twice previously. Because I think even a mechanic who had not done this installation before would have struggled with the level or the lack of detail in the installation instructions. So you can imagine somebody like myself who's not a mechanic and has never done this before, how frustrating that lack of information was. Now that being said, once I'd read the instructions a couple of times, had all the parts laid out in front of me and looked at those as I read the instructions, I started to feel more confident and ready to start the installation process. So my advice to you there is unbox everything, get the instructions, read through it 2 or 3 times, and you'll start to get a better feel for how it all goes together. And then when you're doing the actual install, keep the instructions handy beside you, because the process needs to be followed in a reasonably accurate procedure. Now in relation to the packaging, I must admit I was really disappointed with the quality of packaging for such an expensive kit and for such a heavy kit. Given that it was being shipped internationally, I'd have thought an extra $20 or $30 spent on the quality of the cardboard packaging and the amount of padding inside the packaging wouldn't have gone astray. The quality of the boxing was more something that you would find cereal or toilet paper wrapped in, rather than a heavy supercharger kit. The main reason I got the VF Engineering Supercharger kit over the other kits that are on the market is the way that VF Engineering have designed their kit to make it integrate extremely well with the other components underneath the bonnet. It almost looks like it's come out of the BMW factory like this, or in other words, that the supercharger was a standard option for this particular model. And now that I've got it and got it installed, I'm not disappointed because it looks just as good as it does in the photos. The quality of the brackets for the supercharger, the quality of the pipework for the inlet and intake pipe look extremely good and professional, and you can see that a fair bit of attention to detail has been put into the design of this supercharger kit. This is the supercharger kit, and as you can see, It looks really good underneath the bonnet. It's just as I wanted it, a nice seamless look. This here is the main bracket for the supercharger, and I don't know if you can catch it, but there's VF Engineering nicely lasered into the bracket. Also need to replace one of the bolts for the oil filter housing just in the back there to secure the back of this main bracket. And there's your inlet pipe, intake pipe. I'll just come around this side. Once again, VF Engineering nicely moulded into that. It really needs a good clean. I've got some plastic polish, I'll do that.
So overall, the quality of the components are extremely good, but there are a couple of things, some smaller details which let it down. The quality of the clamps that they use are just a basic worm drive clamp, and I'd have thought for the value of the kit that the stronger clamps would have been a more suitable option, particularly when connecting the inlet and intake pipework to the supercharger itself. It's only small details, but they make a difference in terms of the overall look and the quality of the build, and I'd have thought a few extra dollars spent on those consumable components would make all the difference. Now, VF Engineering in their literature claim that this install is going to take roughly about 8 hours, but I found it took almost double that. So if you're doing this by yourself at home and you've never done anything like this before, certainly allow at least 2 days, maybe 2.5 days to do this installation. And the real reason for that is not the complexity of the install, but the fact that you're working in really tight places. So you try to jam a supercharger and all its pipework into a really cramped space, and it just adds to the time it takes to remove old components and to install new components. For example, getting the existing pipework from the original airbox to the throttle body, depending who has played with that before as to how those clamps are positioned, they can be a real nightmare to get off. I must have spent 45 minutes just removing the hose or the pipework to the throttle body, because the access I had to those worm drive clamps was incredibly tight. I would highly recommend you buy a new CCV kit. In other words, a crankcase ventilation kit. You're going to be working around the throttle body anyway, which is where that valve's located. So while you've got a lot of the pipework off, you might as well replace that valve now, particularly if you don't know how old it is. But secondly, you're going to have to modify one of the hoses that comes off the crankcase ventilation valve, and I can guarantee you 100% that you're going to break that hose while you're trying to modify it. Rather than mucking around with an old brittle hose, might as well buy the whole kit. It'll mean that you're not going to have to stop halfway through your project while you wait for replacement parts to come in. There's my free tip for you. Now, another modification you're going to have to make is to the wiring harness for the MAFS. Another modification you're going to have to make is to the wiring harness on the MAFS sensor. Because you're relocating the air filter, the existing harness isn't going to be long enough to get the MAFS sensor into its new position. So as part of the kit, VF Engineering sends you a joiner wiring harness. So you'll need to cut the existing harness, solder in that new joiner piece so that you can relocate the MAFS sensor. You're going to have to extend the power steering return line, because the power steering lines you're going to have to reroute behind the alternator. So as part of the kit, they send you a joiner piece so that you can extend the power steering return line hose so that you can now reroute it behind the alternator. The other thing you're going to have to do is install a spacer to raise the height of the power steering reservoir, and that's to make room for the supercharger itself to sit just in above the alternator. They're the main modifications that you're going to have to make to existing components underneath the bonnet. One of the things you're going to have to do is relocate the air filter and the MAFS sensor. This is
a matter of just finding the best spot for it, and at the moment I've got this temporarily in position because my final position is going to really depend on when I get the bumper installed and the brake ducts installed and headlights. Once I've got all those other components, then I can work out a final position for that pod filter. So if you've installed this kit and you've done it a different way, can you shoot me a message in the comments below, because I'd be really interested to see what other people are doing with it. I've sort of made this up as I went along based on the space that I had available and how I thought it should go, because it's not really clear in the instructions. I'll just move the camera around and we'll have a squiz at that. This is the pod filter and that's the MAFS sensor there. So this is the extended wiring harness which connects up to that. As you can see, I've just got that wired and cable tied on. So once I get the headlight assembly in and all the brake duct back in there, then I'll finalise my position there.
Now also as part of the kit you get new spark plugs, which I guess are a high temp spark plug. Clips for the injectors, particularly if they've never been removed before, can be a little bit fiddly to get out. But a bit of lube when you reinstall them and things like that make the injector replacement quite an easy process. The bracket itself for the supercharger I found really challenging. It's quite fiddly and it's a matter of replacing a couple of the bolts out of the alternator. So what I found tricky about that was having to line up the bolt hole through the bracket, through a spacer piece, and then through two slots in the alternator. Getting all those to line up like millimetre perfect was a real challenge. Just take your time with it, don't get too frustrated, and it will eventually all go together. It fits extremely well. Now one of the other things you're going to have to do as part of the install is install a bypass valve, which goes from the inlet pipe work through to the intake pipe work, and then has a vacuum line which connects to the back of the intake manifold. That was a little bit fiddly because access once again is really tight. You're having to feed that in amongst wiring for the alternator, heater hoses, and there's not a lot of room to move under there, but it's a matter of working it out the best route for it that you can. Coming around this side, there's the hose there, which is the extension piece for one of the hoses off the CCV. I was going to try and get underneath to show you where that bypass valve is, but basically it's down in through there and connects from a fitting on the bottom of this to a fitting on the bottom of that, and then there's a vacuum line which runs around the back and hooks up to the vacuum connection on the back of the intake manifold there. Because it's a self-oiled supercharger, you don't need to worry about running lines from the sump and all that sort of thing. You get a drain line which connects to the bottom of the supercharger, and then you'll need to drain the oil and replace it, I think they say every 7,000 miles, which is roughly about every 10,000 kilometres. So apart from the fact that you're working with old components and in tight spaces, the installation process I found pretty straightforward. As I said before, allow at least double the time that VF Engineering say you can do it. I would think though, given that I've already installed one of these, if I was to install the second one, I'd be probably much closer to the 8 hours than the 16 hours. So that's my thoughts on the VF Engineering Supercharger kit for the BMW E46 with the M54 B25 engine. So how would I rate the supercharger kit based on the quality of packaging, the quality of the components, and the ease of installation? And I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Now bear in mind I haven't started it up yet, and I'm still to do a dyno run with it. Keep watching for my future videos where I get it down onto the dyno, because my score may change either up or down based on the performance of this kit when we get it on the dyno. Now if you've installed the VF Engineering Supercharger kit onto your E46 BMW, drop us a comment below, because I'd really like to hear your thoughts on it and whether you agree with my rating of 7 out of 10. Also, if you've installed any sort of forced induction onto your E46 BMW, hey, drop me a comment and let me know what you love about your BMW. If you'd like to see more videos about BMW ownership,
maintenance, performance upgrades, and to follow the build on my E46, then remember to subscribe and tickle the bell so you get notified each time a new video comes out. If you'd like to get caught up with what I've been doing on my E46, then I'd strongly recommend that you watch this video here, or if you want to see the video that YouTube thinks you're going to enjoy the most, then you can watch this video here. So I've really enjoyed your company. Thank you very much for watching. But until we meet again, look after yourselves, stay safe, and TTFN.